Hi, I'm Sharon Bandesha, and today I'm here to talk to Alan Lofthouse about the latest news on holiday payments. So, Alan, earlier this year there was an announcement on holiday pay and corrective payments for NHS staff. Can you tell me what the latest news is, please?
Hi, Sharon. So what we know is that employers have received the money from NHS England to make the payments to people. What we expect to be happening right now is that payroll and HR should be working together to calculate the corrective payments. So if those people that remember, it's for the two preceding financial years, and you can find out more information on our website about what that's made up of. And the payment should be made to staff by the end of September 2021.
So, do branches need to do anything about corrective payments at the moment?
So we think that most things should be moving on in the background nicely, but it would be worth branches speaking to their employers to make sure that they're aware about the national framework, and also that they've put in place an appeals mechanism. Because if the corrective payments are wrong, then staff need a way to say to their employer, I think this is wrong, here's my evidence, and for the employer to make the change. And then the only other thing branches should be doing at the moment is letting members know about the payments, explaining it as best they can, or directing them to our website where they can find out more information.
So, now we've got the corrective payments, what about the future and finding a forward fix?
So the national framework corrected the payments going back 2 years, which is great. But from the 1st of April this year, employers need to make sure that they're taking into account, when they're calculating holiday pay, overtime and additional standard time. And for those that would remember, additional standard time is someone who's part-time that's working more hours than their contracted hours, up to 37.5 hours. And then everything above 37.5 hours is overtime. And what we know about employers is there's two standard ways across the NHS that holiday pay is calculated. One is a mechanism which rolls up holiday pay, and people can see this on their payslip as WTD, which stands for Working Time Directive. The other is agenda for change average pay. And what that does is it looks back over a reference period and it calculates the average of what somebody would have received had they been at work, and then it pays them that as a proportion of their holiday pay.
So, what about multipliers, and should we be discouraging employers from using them?
So, as I said, the rolled up pay, the WTD method, uses a multiplier. And what it does is it multiplies whatever's being paid by a percentage for every unit. So let's say an hour of work, you have a multiplier that adds, let's say 12.5 or 13%. And that then is rolled up holiday pay. So you get it in advance of your holiday. And then when you take your holiday, obviously, in theory, you saved up all that holiday pay in advance and then you use it for your holiday. But in effect, people don't. So holiday pay, a rolled up holiday pay, is recommended not to be done. And ACAS certainly recommends that it shouldn't be done. If employers are using rolled up pay, it's because their current payroll system only allows them to do that. We would be expecting employers to move over to average pay as a better way of calculating holiday pay. But in the very short term, employers are unlikely to be able to change their systems. But we are aware that there is work going on in the background at national level to look at ways in which they can switch between this rolled up pay and move over to average pay. What we know about multipliers is that if you get them too low, then there's a risk that you underpay people, and they should reflect the amount of annual leave that people have. It's quite a complex area. It's much easier to use average pay, and that's certainly what we'd like to see in the future.
So, what's the link between regularity and eligibility for payments?
So for things to be paid as holiday pay, they should be the terms are regular and settled. But what we haven't yet got is a full definition of what regular regular and settled means. So we're likely to see more court cases, not necessarily in the NHS, but just more court cases that will try and define what that means. So for instance, once a year, if you do one overtime shift a year, that is regular. So actually employers are going to need to think about what regularity means. Our position is that the minimum amount of regularity is what we would expect. We think employers are going to look for a higher level of regularity, meaning that staff have to do a certain number of overtime shifts within a year to become eligible for a payment. So for example, in Scotland, that's 4 times in any 12 months. What employers need to really be careful of is two things, really, is the eligibility criteria have the potential to be discriminatory in case somebody is, for reasons of a protected characteristic, is working a different kind of pattern of work and they can't meet that eligibility threshold because of a disability or because of a protected characteristic. And the other thing is if they set the eligibility criteria too high, so the regularity is too high to reach, then actually people may lead to claims for underpayment of wages. So those are two things that the employers need to take into account.
So what should be included in holiday pay? Is it just overtime?
So what the contract says, the agenda for change or NHS terms and conditions, is that pay should be what you would have received had you been at work. So the holiday pay case law has evolved over the last however many years to now include things like commission payments, overtime. And what I'd say is that it needs to be everything that somebody receives that counts towards normal pay. And that will depend on employer by employer. But there's no reason why, for instance, on-call payments, meal break payments for those staff that work in ambulance services, anything which staff are paid regularly that is to do with their work that should count as normal pay should be included. So I would suggest that what employers and branches do is they look at all the payments that are made to staff and make a decision about those on a basis. But if employers decide to rule something out and that's a regular payment and it's got some value, then they could expect claims in the future. So, I think the argument should be to include anything that counts as normal pay.
So what should branches be doing going forward?
Okay, so the first thing I'd say is wherever you found this video, you should also find a new branch guide. So there's two branch guides. One is about the corrective payment. So that's the bit going backwards from the 1st of April for 2 financial years. But we've put a new guide on the website, which is about the forward fix. So what we'd make sure branches doing 3 things. One is speak to your employer, make sure they're aware of the national framework and make sure those corrective payments are going to be made to staff by September. We also want to make sure that branches are checking with employers that they're putting in the systems that needed from the 1st of April 2021 onwards to ensure staff are receiving the correct holiday pay. That doesn't mean we're expecting branches to reach a collective agreement over it, because actually how employers pay people, the contract is clear. We've not changed the agenda for change agreement, so that's clear. They just need to make sure that employers are making holiday pay correct for staff going forward. And then it would be useful for branches to understand what payroll systems are in place. So does your employer use agenda for change average pay? Does your employer use the rolled up pay, so that WTD payment? And there's more information in our guide. So it's just useful for branches to know that in case they get inquiries from members about how it's going to work going forward.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Sharon.